So let's try and put some of these sketching mechanic skills to work and begin to focus on one of the two main pillars of sketching, at least design sketching, as far as I'm concerned, and that is proportion and getting things proportionally accurate, which is kind of the relative dimensions or size within an object. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try and resketch this vintage Motorola Razr phone. This is a sketch and we're just going to try and duplicate it. What I will say is, with respect to proportion, one of the things to understand is that it's a lot easier, at least in my book, to see equal proportions, to understand, well, is this the same length as that, or is this the same size as that? But when you start to break away from a square or equally sized things, it becomes more difficult. So I just happen to know, because I've run this exercise a number of times, that the proportion of this, the overall height to the width, it's about 3 to 1. Now, one other thing that you can kind of take from here is that you don't always have to have a measuring device like a ruler to measure. You can use your pen. So what I'm going to do, just to kind of double check that 3 to 1 calculation, is I'm going to take the tip of my pen and measure it, and I'm going to put my fingernail or my thumbnail to the width of this object, and I'm going to see how that relates to the height. And so there's the width. Let me come up to about right here. It's just about the top of this. And then, well, I lost my spot. So let's go from there, measure it again, and then up to here. So let me kind of put my thumb there and then go up. So again, it's about 3 to 1. So I'm just going to just very lightly, this is where a 4-color pen might come in handy. I'm going to put a line right there. And then if we remember where that next one was, I'm going to jump up to right here, put a line right here. And so what you've got now is, if I start to think about this in terms of easy to understand proportions, here's a square. There's another square from here up to here. And then there's finally another square as we move all the way to the top. And going through this monotonous of an exercise isn't always necessary, but for the purpose of this exercise, I really want to start talking about proportion. So let's come over here. Let's set this up. I want to draw the overall 3 to 1 rectangle that will ultimately work in the details, and we'll talk about some other aspects of kind of getting started with design sketching as we go through it. But what I've done is I've rotated my page. I've set myself up at my ideal angle. You might even be able to see this 30-degree angle coming through my piece of paper. But I'm going to just drop in a straight line very lightly. Again, I'm thinking lightly. This may be easy today. I'm just going to kind of pull over these lines over to here and line that up, and then look for that square proportion. It's not perfect. I guess that I'd let that drop down. So I'm kind of looking at this. It needs to be just a little bit wider. And I'm going to continue with freehand until I feel like I may need a straight edge. If you feel like you might want a straight edge here to make sure this thing, I have a tendency to make my drawings kind of lean a little bit, the top to the left. You can kind of see that. I think that is a result of my body mechanics and just kind of trying to understand that that's what happens. Okay, so we've got the overall proportion, or at least we hope we do. And so now I want to start working on maybe the, let's put the arcs in here and here and here and here, and maybe right there, and maybe this hinge, that hinge for my phone will be about right there. So what I like to do is I like to think about the center, and sometimes I'll even sketch in a line that represents where it's going to intersect the outside lines. But here, this is going to be a fairly quick arc, but notice the orientation of my paper again. I've set it up to where I'm trying to succeed. And then I'm going to flip it over for the back side, I'm gonna hit that middle point tangent. Notice I'm going beyond where I need to go. And then there's, I'm gonna estimate this distance right here. Try and reproduce the same arc. And even though this phone and the details, like there's a change, that's no longer a straight line. It starts to turn in right there. This seems like it is somewhat of a pure arc, but right here, that arc starts to accelerate or get more of a turn. I talk about accelerate and decelerate in different ways, but it starts to get as a tighter radius right through here. And we'll add those details later. And then I'm going to step off a little bit further. This distance from here to there is not quite as much as from there down to there. So I'm going to, maybe again, might be helpful for me to drop something like that in. Give myself 3 points to ghost that arc in. I'm trying to keep it light. All right, so now if I go back to the top, there's kind of this distance right here. That arc looks like it's maybe a little bit extreme. I might correct that as I continue to work this drawing in. All right, so yeah, let's drop in this hinge. If I was to look at it relative to my original 3 squares, here's a square, here's a square. It's about the width of the hinge down to the start. And so there's maybe the overall width or the height of my hinge. And then let's start to look at the keypad, because there are some things that we can learn as we sketch this keypad. One is I'm going to look at this distance right here. I'm going to try and estimate that over here. Right now we are sketching in kind of the easiest way to hit proportion, and then I'm drawing 1-to-1, and we have this thing lined up. It's giving me some things that might be helpful. Or the way that we're approaching this drawing might be a little bit easier than if we were drawing something at a different scale where the reference image is a different size, or even if it's not a reference image and you're looking at a 3-dimensional object, it's not quite as easy as this. I went ahead and dropped in a center line or something close to a center line. Also, one thing that I want to note here is that the sketch that I'm doing is extremely rough, but it's also extremely light. And as hopefully what you'll see as we finish this drawing is that if you can keep it light right here as you construct the drawing, then when we add details a little bit later, you just add more pen pressure, or you use a different pen that has a thicker stroke to differentiate between what we have right now, which is the construction lines, and what we'll end up doing later. So I've got my width, I've got the thing. I'm just going to go ahead. There is a little bit of an angle right here for that hinge. And at this point, there may be some times where I want to go ahead and darken in some things. I'm just going to kind of estimate the width of this little detail right here. There's a slight angle on it, and then it comes over and it's straight. And notice I am putting a little bit more pressure right now because I feel pretty confident in the details. And then I'm going to look at this proportional relationship. If I look at that, it's not as wide as it is tall before we get to this separation where the hinge is. And then I'm going to try and mirror that to the other side while I'm thinking about it. And then that comes down. I've got the same detail on the bottom that I had on the top, so I'm going to reference that. So much of this type of sketching and construction, you're going to reference geometry that you've already drawn. I'm just going to even pull that down. I'm trying to mirror that to the top. There's an extra line in here. I'm not exactly sure. I don't remember when I drew this what that line represents. This one is just, it's a kind of break line in the surface, but not really a part line. All right, so then there's very little space between here and the top of my keypad, which I had sketched that keypad in earlier. The keypad extends a little bit further than this detail, so that's maybe where that fillet starts. But I'm going to come over here and sketch all the way down. Come to the other side. Again, it extends a little bit further than that. And then it's real close to this line that I've already sketched in down here. So notice I'm not going quite as fast, but I'm still keeping the line weight fairly light. Okay, so you know what? Let's move on to the top where I've got a screen and start to look at some of these other details. So some of the things that I'm paying attention to. This line, it looks like it extends a little bit further than this line right here. It's either inline or this extends out is a little bit wider than that. It's just something that I want to pay attention to. It's very close. This is where maybe a straight edge could be beneficial. And notice also that what I like to do is I like to draw typically the lines or the big arcs that make up a majority of the shape first, and then come back in with the fillets or the corner radius. And I've got some distance out here. This actually, I've got just kind of this small little, this was I think like a little chrome, maybe stainless steel detail. And then I come up, and then here's where maybe I go ahead and put this. It's not a pure fillet. It accelerates as it moves around, and then I'm also just looking at that arc that I drew in, and I realize that maybe there's a little bit more space here than it is over here, so I'm making changes as I begin to slow my pen down and darken in some of that line work. There's a circle right here, and then there's an offset circle for the bezel of my screen. And then there's another offset for where the actual screen shines through the bezel. And I'm just looking at that distance. I'm going to carry that up. This is where it gets a little bit funky. And how much distance is there between here and here? It's a little bit more than that was. And as I start to look at this and evaluate it, I feel like my proportion isn't quite right with that screen. If I looked at it, it looked like it needed to be a little bit taller. And so that's okay. I'm just going to make that adjustment on the fly. Okay, so now let's get into the keypad. If I look at this keypad and I try and break up, maybe if I think about a straight line right here, this distance and that distance are about the same, and that comes up to the numbers. And so I'm going to look at that same thing over here. I'm going to come up just a little bit. That's going to be the top of the numbers where this red line is. I'm adjusting my drawing ever so slightly as I continue to work through it. And then again, from this kind of corner, this little filleted corner in the bottom of this up to there, I can start to divide this into quarters. And so it's easier to divide something in half than into quarters or thirds. But I'm basically just sketching in some lines that I'll end up using as I complete this sketch. The other thing that I want to think about, I've already got a line drawn in for the center. I want to think about maybe either where this angle starts or stops, or maybe somewhere right in the middle. But I have to divide this by thirds. So I've got about this much space to either side. And then if I just very lightly sketch in thirds, that kind of looks like a third. And then this third would actually be in the middle of that angle. And so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and sketch this angled line in and this angled line in, and notice that it's starting and stopping. It starts before it hits that line. I'm going through the midpoint, and then it ends after it hits that line. I'm trying to do that on both sides. And so now what I'm going to do is take where it hits the top of the line and bring that down, because I think that it's really a lot easier for me to add these angled lines. My proportion isn't that great across here. To add those angled lines all at one time. So, and I'll add again the fillet in just a moment. I'll do the same thing on the other side. I feel like I'm more consistent with drawing those angles if I do them all at one time. And now to get all the sides of those numerical buttons, I'm going to pull that out. And then this needs to stop. It starts at the bottom. And then there's a little bit of a fillet as it comes in. So you know, this was one of the cooler details of this phone, is that this is one piece of really thin metal for the keypad, as opposed to a whole bunch of three-dimensional buttons that then went through another surface to make contact to activate or actuate the button. Just a really cool kind of keypad detail. All right, so I'm looking at this circle, and this circle, I want to look at about that distance for this top similar snaking around detail. But my circle goes all the way down to here and to there. And so again, circle, I'm not as concerned with the orientation or angle of my paper, but I am going to ghost this in a few times to try and get a good idea as to what a good circle is. And then I've got an offset coming up. I can carry this angle, where that angle starts, up to the top. It's going in the opposite direction now, so it's angling back in the other way. And I can carry this line up. So again, referencing geometry that I've already constructed in my sketch. And then let's see, I've got this detail right here that continues up. I cut that circle in half. Adding the fillets after the longer gestures. This is also a time where if you had a circle template, this would be nice. I'll show you how I do a freehand circle. Let me work this middle one in. Again, I'm ghosting it. Now I'm just kind of letting my pen come down. Is that I like to do a portion of the circle. Again, what I'm looking at is I'm looking at like a number of revolutions of that circle, like 3 or 4, and I'm trying to pick out the happy medium in between all those. But what I like to do is I like to draw kind of between 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock, or maybe between 8 o'clock and 11 o'clock. And then, because I think that I've got more control, That last one was not very good. And then my goal ultimately with like line weight is going to be to match probably the darkness that I just added there. I can begin to add some of these details in, these little arrows, which because of the way that I've constructed this, I already had lines that those arrows would fall on. There's this weird symbol. There's a kind of globe with a grid on it. There's a little mail envelope. There's another one of these. I'm not as concerned with the details as I am with the proportion, and we've kind of already hit those. The justification on the numbers is pretty cool on this keypad too. All right, so let's work in some of the other details. I've got this where the microphone is, that is standing out just a little bit. Oh wait, I need to probably go ahead and darken in the extents of that little, I'm guessing this was probably stainless steel. This little stainless steel keypad. Because this little detail is just a little bit to the outside of that. There's a fillet there. I'm going to take it all the way down. Just a little bit to the outside, and then there's a fillet. And then a part break. And then right on that center line is one of the vent holes for the microphone. And then, let's see, I need to put 3 more to each side, and it comes out really to about right here. So let's try that. Let's do one to the outside. They're also on just the tiniest little arc. And now I need 2 in the middle of that. All right. So one of the interesting things is the way that this arc transitions from the top. It's not a pure fillet, and the same thing kind of happens down here, although this is a little bit more abrupt. This transitions down into a tangent. This one doesn't so much, and then down here there's also this little detail that jogs in. I'm going to put that in. Let's see, it's just a straight line between here and my hinge. Over on the other side, the same thing. Let's see, I started that about right there. Just kind of slightly tapering in. And then this is going to go all the way up to my hinge again. Notice how I'm slowing down that sketch gesture. Oh, I left a couple of details out here. Something looks a little bit funky with my proportion of this screen. It still doesn't look tall enough. I don't think I've stepped in far enough from the edge. So that screen, I think, is going to be a little bit thinner than what I've drawn, which could be important depending upon the purpose of your sketch or the purpose of your drawing. Let's see, over here, I've got these buttons that exist. Let's see, this one is about the width of the button down. I'm going to step over to here. I'm just going to put a little tick mark there, a tick mark here for the start of that button. I'm gonna put one here, and then that is almost in line, maybe in line with the bottom of my screen. And those just give me a reference point for me to add and darken in this little button detail. And then there's another one on the opposite side. Is that the same height? It is. So I can carry that over, I can carry this over. So here are my two tick marks here. Real thin little button. And that will allow me to at least finish off the frame of this phone. Here's that fillet that, well, not fillet, not pure fillet that rolls in. I can tell that this is leaning. That's just kind of a little bit lower. If I came back with another pin later, I'd try and adjust that, or if I came back with tools. But I've got the corresponding detail down here, which I haven't worked in yet, which again, it accelerates as it approaches the edge. And now I'm pretty close. It looks like my attempt to adjust what I know is a little bit of a challenge, in that my sketches tend to lean to the right towards the top. I tried to adjust that, and so I think that I overcompensated a little bit, and my sketch is leaning ever so slightly left near the top. But like I said, you know, this is one of those things where if you've got, this is a fairly crisp drawing already, but one thing that you can do to further differentiate your object lines and maybe continue to clean things up would be to come back in with another pen. Here I've got a razor point. And since it's a little bit thicker than the ballpoint pen that I used earlier, or it can be, then I can actually make some adjustments and fix some of those things and maybe work the alignment issue in a different way. So let's see. I can slow that pen down as I roll over this way, and there I did. I tried, as I worked this in, I tried to lift that up just a little bit. And of course, this might also be a time where you use the straight edge. And here's where it can differentiate again. So I think my proportion was a little bit off. I'm going to try and cheat and make it a little bit taller right there. Maybe to hit that proportion here, I'll cheat to the inside to try and make this a little bit thinner. Same thing on this side. So as I'm adding this extra line weight, I'm also trying to make some slight refinements and adjustments to what maybe I think I got potentially a little bit wrong. And on this sketch, I just don't feel like I need to go in and use this razor point everywhere, but there are a few places that I just want to drop in the razor point and clean up some straight lines. And then maybe to differentiate my screen, I'll just add a little bit of a kind of gradient, hatched gradient across that surface.